This episode is brought to you by Squarespace.
Alright, so if at any point in this episode you guys hear crunching in the background, this is it right here. Let me show you guys real quick. No, not the freaking... She's trying to get the mic. Alright you guys, what's going on, man? And welcome back to yet another King Dips video. Now, as you guys can tell from the title of this episode, titles are down here now, right? We're going to be talking today about my Leica 35mm Summicron version 4 King of Bokeh. Alright, so here she is, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you guys can see that here nicely. If not, I will do some type of B-roll because for some reason, my close focusing on this Tamron lens that I'm filming with doesn't always work right, so hopefully you guys can see that. But this is, of course, the famous King of Bokeh lens that everyone seems to be raving over at the moment. Now, really quick, before we even jump into this is not going to be a review of this lens. This lens has just been my workhorse, and you guys are gonna get my experience and opinion of it, and whether or not this lens stacks up nicely still against some of the competitors, because there's a ton of options for the 35mm lens spot for your Leica M mount camera. So with that out of the way, here is my experience with the legendary Summicron version 4 King of Bokeh. This wasn't the first lens that I owned for this camera. On my M2, the first lens that I ever had on here was the Voigtlander 35mm color scope bar version 2, I believe. So that lens served me for a good year and a half before I decided I wanted to upgrade. Now, the options that I had on the table were the 35mm Summicron spherical, but at that time, $3,000 wasn't my budget, and so I wanted to find a Summicron at or around 2,000 bucks. And so I did a lot of research and I found that there were Summicrons made in Canada, and that's how I stumbled upon this bad boy right here. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, there were other iterations of the Summicrons that were made in Canada, but the King of Bokeh, the version 4, I believe is probably the best out of the bunch. Apparently version 4 was made not only in Canada, but also in Germany. Right there inside it says made in Canada. Again, I'm gonna put some B-roll in here if it doesn't end up focusing. Now, I picked this lens up for about 1,800 bucks, which seems like today a steal, because when you go online nowadays searching for this lens, it's up towards the $3,000 range, you know, about the same price as an spherical. Now, the reason why a lot of people call this the King of Bokeh lens is not because it has the greatest bokeh at all. Honestly, it doesn't, let me just say that. But from what I've heard and from my experience, the bokeh is better at f4 than it is sometimes at f2. Not in terms of the depth of field, shallow depth of field, but just the rendering of it. Does it have an okay bokeh? Yeah, it does. But if you're really looking for something with like shallow depth of field, you're not gonna be reaching for this lens. But what you are getting from this lens, ladies and gentlemen, is a classic Leica Summicron. What does that mean? Well, some of the favorite things that I love about this is, first of all, the appearance. Let's take a look here at the build. So on the top here, you have your depth of field scale. It kind of has that classic look. It's not like the vertical lines on the other Canada Summicrons. On top of that, you have your aperture scale, which is honestly really, really nice. It doesn't really make too much noise, but you definitely feel all the half clicks in between. Focusing ring is really, really smooth, and if you get a very good version, you can pretty much, you know, move this thing with one finger and focus extremely quick. Also, the lens hood is a square lens hood, and so you get that kind of classic looking Leica lens, which adds to kind of the aesthetic of it. Now, the next thing that I want to talk about is the performance on this lens and how it performs with both black and white film, color, the sharpness, the rendering and whatnot. And we're gonna get into that here in just a second. But really quick, I want to give a huge thank you and shout out to our sponsor for this episode, the good folks over at Squarespace. Squarespace is your all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Now, all of last year, I talked about how you should be creating your own website as a photographer to help you stand out just a little bit more than the crowd. And if you still haven't done that, don't worry, it's only February and you can get started now with Squarespace. Squarespace pretty much gives you all of the tools you need to get started, from award-winning templates to a commerce store where you can sell prints and whatever you want, as well as my favorite feature, the portfolio, to be able to show off your work. So the next time a client asks to see your work, you don't have to send them a link to your Instagram, just send them straight over to your website. And the best part is, you guys, Squarespace is hooking it up with 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or a website. Just head over to squarespace.com/kingjapes and you'll get that 10% off of your first purchase of a domain or a website. Huge thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this episode, but now let's jump back into it. Now, optically, it is not a perfect lens, and I say that with good intentions. Perfect lens is going to be like, your Summicron, a spherical version. That's going to be clinical. Everything's going to be sharp. It's going to be similar to like a Canon, a modern Canon kind of like L series glass. But with the King of Bokeh, what I notice about this lens is that there's a certain character to it, especially in black and white photographs. In black and white images, I feel like this lens stands out immensely, and you get these crazy kind of looking tones, as well as, a not so perfectly sharp image. At f2, it's going to perform well. If you want to do portraits, if you want to do anything with nice shallow depth of field, you can still achieve that with this lens. Again, it's not a bokeh monster, but it does have pretty nice rendering. At f4 is where I feel like this lens kind of shines. f4 to around f8, and that's generally where I shoot this lens. Most of the time I am set to 5.6 or even like f8, and I just forget about it because that's where I feel like the sweet spot of this lens is. You get a nice balance between depth of field as well as sharpness across the frame. Now, when you stop down to like f16, everything in your image is going to be sharply in focus. Obviously, if you're zone focusing, that is a great thing to be able to shoot at f16 and still have a decently sharp image. But I do really like this lens for black and white images. Now, in terms of color photography is always going to be good with this lens. The rendering of it has a very, very nice, softer kind of look. It's not, again, your typical clinical, sharp modern lens. There's a bit of a older, kind of more vintage feel to it. And that's something that I personally love in my photographs, because I strive sometimes to make my images look kind of classic. And if you're looking for a classic looking and shooting lens, this lens performs very, very well. And it's something that you guys might actually enjoy. This is just my opinion. This lens is fantastic. And if you're looking for a Leica 35mm Summicron and you don't want to get the spherical version, I would definitely pick this over the other Summicron models. I think it's like version 1, version 2 from Canada, that has kind of like those vertical lines on your depth of field scale. Now, of course, this lens isn't perfect. Actually, it's notorious for being extremely problematic. The main one being that the front element of the lens ends up getting really loose, and that is what happened with mine. So a lot of times, when I show this on camera, it looks perfect. Everything is lined up and nice. Sometimes it's a little bit off, but this lens, for some reason, will twist this way. And it gets really bad, because if you look here at the top, the actual aperture ring will twist with it. And that's loose, ladies and gentlemen. That is not a good thing. And so sometimes I'll be out shooting, I'll set it here and then I'll bump into something. Yeah, okay, that's a terrible example. I'll bump into something and then, something like this will happen. And so I'll be on the street looking, making photographs, boom, 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 boom. I'll look inside of my viewfinder and I'm like, holy crap, the lens hood is sideways. Now, from what I know, there's a part in here that gets loose and that, Leica doesn't really make it anymore. And so if this can be fixed and you guys know where to get it fixed, hit your boy up, because I'm trying to get this fixed. But it doesn't really affect performance. It just affects the lens aesthetically. And so if you end up having your lens sideways like this, it's a quick little fix. And most of the times, as you kind of straighten it out, there is a little bit of tension to where it's not completely loose. Like, it's not going to be, flying and flinging around, but with enough force, of course, it can eventually, set itself out of place. Now, is this annoying? Absolutely. But as long as it doesn't really affect the performance of the lens, I'm not really tripping. Okay, so we get to the part of the video now where we're gonna be talking about, is this lens worth it compared to some of the other options out on the market today? First up, let's look up the price of this lens. All right, so I'm looking online right now, and the Leica 35mm Summicron version 4 King of Bokeh is selling roughly, let's get an average. So we got $3,650, $2,099, $3,400, 2,480, 2,099. Okay, so anywhere between $2,500 to $3,500. So, let's just keep in that range. That's a lot of money for a, very tiny 35mm Summicron. Now, with that said, what are the other options that I would think this is comparable to? Okay, 6-bit. The 6-bit is going for around 3,000 bucks. And that lens, you guys, is clinically sharp. So there's also a ton of great options from Voigtlander, like the Voigtlander 35mm 2.5 color scope R. That lens is like 200 to 400 bucks. It's tiny, it's a pancake lens, and it performs extremely well for the price. And if you're just getting into the M mount system and you don't have a ton of money to throw into a lens, that's probably the first lens that I would recommend purchasing. But if you want to move up from that, you have the Voigtlander Ultrons, which is like their 35mm f2 line. The 35mm f2 from Voigtlander is 799 bucks. And that is brand new. You can get them for like 600 bucks used on eBay. You also have the Zeiss lenses, the 35 2.8 Bygone lenses. And these are great as well. They're going for about $700 to $1,000. And so there's a ton of different options out there. When it comes down to it, you guys, where do I rank this in kind of the grand scheme of things? Well, if you're just getting into the Leica M mount system and you spend all your money on the body and you don't have, a ton of money to throw at a lens, I would say go for a cheaper option like maybe like the Voigtlander Ultron. Those are great lenses at an affordable price point. I think they're like $600, $700. And at f2, it is a great performer. If you're looking for something a little bit cheaper, there's also the 35mm color scope R from Voigtlander as well. That is a 2.5 lens, and that performs extremely well at around 300 to 400 bucks on a good day. And honestly, if I never purchased this lens, I would probably go for something like the Ultron, just because it is a newer lens that got a recent kind of facelift and update from Voigtlander, which is great. Now, where I think the King of Bokeh stands, in my opinion, is at this weird point to where if you want to own a great piece of glass that's going to perform well for street photography, for landscape, anything that you throw at this lens, it's going to perform very, very well. With black and white, with color, there's going to be great sharpness in your images. That's nothing to worry about. This lens is going to perform very well for you. But it does come with a little bit of a price tag. And so maybe if you are coming from the Voigtlander lenses and you want to upgrade, I think this would be a very nice upgrade if you're looking for kind of like a classic looking feel to your images, rather than like a very, very sharp and clinical looking image at the spherical end of things. I prefer this lens a lot more than that, just because of the rendering. The King of Bokeh, it just sounds dope, you know what I mean? It's a great looking lens. And Leica lenses often hold their value very well. I purchased this at around 1,800 bucks. They're going for about 3,500 bucks now. Based off of experience, it's not the perfect lens, but it's a lens that has served me personally very well. It's very easy to focus with, and it's very, very sharp for what it is. So thank you guys, man, for tuning into this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Comment down below what you guys think of this lens, and if you would buy this for your Leica or not. And that's gonna wrap it up for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one. As always, Minolta Gang. Whew.